Hello, everybody. I am John Allen, the editor of Crux, your one-stop shopping destination for the very best in smart, wired, and independent Catholic journalism. You can find us online at cruxnow.com. And I am your host here at Last Week in the Church. Now, this is the show where we kind of raid the fridge, take out some leftover Catholic news, put it in a frying pan, sprinkle over some spices and secret sauce, and serve it up piping hot. Here's what we've got for you this week. A bittersweet Easter. Pope Francis celebrates what are supposed to be the most joyous days on the Christian calendar, and yet the war in Ukraine runs like a leitmotif through his reflections. Happy birthday, Pope Benedict. The Emeritus Pope turns 95. The Envoy Arrives. After more than a year, the United States finally has a new ambassador to the Vatican. A summit with lots of subtext. Pope Francis, it turns out, may be meeting Patriarch Kirill of the Russian Orthodox Church in June. Outreach or outrage? A Vatican official gives a talk to a pro-gay Catholic group, generating controversy. And finally, fish or cut bait? The German bishops insist that the Vatican make a decision about Cardinal Maria Woelki of the Archdiocese of Cologne, who is under fire for his handling of sex abuse cases. All that and more is waiting for you on the other side, so please, for the love of God, stick around. All right, everybody, happy Tuesday to you. Happy Tuesday, April 19th in the year of our Lord 2022. Listen, just to lift the veil a little bit here at Last Week in the Church, you see this show on Tuesdays, but we actually film it on Mondays, which means that right now, for us, it is Monday morning in Rome. Now, that may not mean very much to you, but here's the thing. The Monday after Easter may just be another day where you are, but here in Italy, it is known as Pasquetta, the Little Easter. And I guarantee you this, nobody in this country works on Monday. Basically, the division of labor in Italy is that Easter Sunday is for your family. Pasquetta, the Monday after Easter, is for your friends. Everybody we know, everyone in this town right now is getting ready for a barbecue someplace. So my point is that if you ever needed proof of the last full measure of our devotion to bringing this program to you, the fact that we're willing to give up our morning on Pasquetta to do it, that ought to seal the deal. And so, since we are here and we're doing our thing, let's dive in. So, a bittersweet Easter. Pope Francis celebrated Good Friday, Holy Saturday, and of course, Easter Sunday over the weekend. And the war in Ukraine was easily the dominant note on all three of those occasions. Let's begin with Good Friday. The centerpiece of Good Friday, in addition to the Good Friday liturgy, is, of course, the Via Crucis, the Way of the Cross procession, held here in Rome at the Colosseum. This was the first time Pope Francis has been able to do it in front of a crowd since the COVID pandemic began. And this time it was mired in a bit of controversy because for the 13th station of the Way of the Cross, that's the one that commemorates Christ's death on the cross, Pope Francis had asked 2 women to carry the cross for that station. One is a nursing student here in Rome. The other is a nurse in Rome. They are good personal friends. What makes this noteworthy is that one is Russian and the other Ukrainian. Now, the act of asking a Russian and a Ukrainian to do this together brought, well, to call it significant would be an understatement, but significant protest from many Ukrainians. Major Archbishop, I should say, Sviatoslav Shevchuk, who is the head of the Greek Catholic Church in Ukraine, called this gesture incoherent and even offensive, arguing that it implied a kind of moral equivalence between the aggressor in the current war, i.e. Russia, and the victim, i.e. Ukraine. Further, he said that reconciliation is premature. Reconciliation can come only after the war is over and those guilty of war crimes have received their just punishments. Then, he said, we can talk about reconciliation. The Ukrainian ambassador to the Vatican lodged a formal protest, and a consortium of Catholic broadcasters in Ukraine even refused to carry the Via Crucis ceremony because of their objections to this bit of symbolism. Pope Francis, on the other hand, obviously did see it as a powerful gesture of reconciliation and no doubt found the improbable friendship between this Ukrainian and this Russian worthy of celebration. Probably also found the fact that they're both women telling, given that most wars tend to be waged by men. And, I think in the end, this was a case of the Pope sort of opting for graciousness as a cornerstone of his geopolitical strategy. I think what Francis realizes is that Russians and Ukrainians, for better or for worse, they are fated to have to find a way to live together. And that's not just a matter of geography, it's a matter of a shared history and culture. And reconciliation is inevitably going to have to be part of that. I think he decided, why wait? Let's take a look at what that might look like right now. Now, it's understandable, I suppose, that many Ukrainians who, are spending their time trying to figure out how not to be slaughtered are not really in the mood for that sort of thing, but this is a case perhaps of the Pope trying to take the long view. On Holy Saturday, the Pope did not actually preside during the Easter Vigil Mass. He decided to sort of towel down and take a little bit of a break by asking somebody else to do it. I always find it ironic that an 85-year-old Pope who was feeling a little winded, in order to sort of give himself a break, would turn to an 88-year-old cardinal, in this case Cardinal John Battista Re, Dean of the College of Cardinals, to take his place, but once again, he did. The Pope nevertheless delivered his homily that night. He called the war in Ukraine cruel, and there were some Ukrainians there. There was a delegation of Ukrainian mayors and parliamentarians who were in Rome. Several of them showed up at the Easter Vigil Mass, including Ivan Fedorov, who is the mayor of Melitopol in eastern Ukraine, who on March 11th was arrested by Russian forces. He was released a few days later as part of a prisoner swap. And addressing Fedorov specifically, Pope Francis said, in early Ukrainian, Christ is risen. So a powerful message. On Easter Sunday, in his traditional Urbi et Orbi address, the Pope came back to the war in Ukraine. He actually described this as the Easter of war. He called the war cruel and senseless. He expressed compassion for its victims, including refugees and internally displaced persons, children who have been orphaned by the war, and others, and acknowledged that Ukraine has been dragged into this war. Now, he did not mention Russia specifically as the aggressor. That is in keeping with his policy from the very beginning of trying to remain, to some extent, above the politics of the conflict, and also to keep channels of communication with the Russians, such as they are, open. And this is part, of course, of the Vatican's broader engagement on the war in Ukraine, which includes the Pope recently sending yet another ambulance through the offices of his top charitable aide, Polish Cardinal Konrad Krajewski, who, by the way, was actually in Ukraine for Good Friday and was photographed praying at one of the sites of mass graves in Ukraine that many people believe is further proof of the atrocities being committed by Russian forces in the country. So, to sum up, the Pope certainly did celebrate the joyous message of the victory of life over death, that resurrection follows entombment. But it was a kind of muted joy this year because of the concern, the anguish, the sorrow that so many people, including the Pope, feel for what is happening in Ukraine. All right, shifting gears. Another thing that happened over the weekend, Pope Benedict XVI celebrated his 95th birthday. Pope Benedict was actually born on a Holy Saturday in 1927 in Bavaria and is still going strong. His top aide, German Archbishop Georg Gänswein, gave an interview on the occasion of the Pope's birthday in which he said he is obviously increasingly frail, his energy is flagging, limited, obviously, in his ability to move around, but said he is still quite lucid. That is, the lights are still on upstairs. Gainswine said the Pope Emeritus, now spends his days. He begins his morning with Mass and then praying the Divine Office, the daily prayer of the Church. Then we'll deal with his correspondence, and if possible, there will be some music. Pope Benedict, we should remember, is actually an accomplished pianist. And then there will be a light lunch in the afternoon. Pope Benedict, if he's feeling up to it, may receive some visitors, and also will spend some time in the Vatican gardens praying the Rosary, no longer walking in the gardens as he always enjoyed, but instead being rolled around in a wheelchair. And then we'll have a light supper, watch the Italian news, and go to bed. Pope Francis earlier in the week, by the way, went over to the Mater Ecclesiae. That's the former monastery in Vatican grounds that's been sort of rehabbed into a residence for the Emeritus Pope, to, offer felicitations for his birthday. I think the significance of all this may be a kind of generational insight that, in a way, Pope Benedict and Francis represent sort of different interpretations of the Second Vatican Council. And remember, both popes, the Second Vatican Council was their formative experience. Pope Benedict was a theological expert, a peritus for Cardinal Joseph Frings during the council. Pope Francis entered the Jesuits in 1958 and was ordained a priest in 1969, which means his formation was smack dab in the middle of Vatican II. And so for both popes, even though they have different readings on some points of the council, Vatican II is very much the crucible of their thinking about the church, and they're probably the last two popes of whom that can be said. I mean, think about it. Let's pick, just almost at random, one guy who everybody would say probably will be on the short list for the next pope. That would be Italian Cardinal Pietro Parolin, currently the Vatican Secretary of State. Parolin is 67, which means he was 12 years old when Vatican II ended in 1965, wasn't really paying much attention. He was ordained a priest in 1980. That's 2 years into the papacy of John Paul II. So for Parolin, and virtually anybody else we might imagine becoming the next pope, their point of reference is not going to be the debates of the Second Vatican Council. It's going to be the papacy of John Paul II. Now, that doesn't tell you much about what direction the church is going to go, but it does tell you a lot about what the terms of debate are likely to be. All right, the envoy arrives. It took a while, quite honestly. Joseph Biden became president of the United States last January, and it's taken 15 months for him to dispatch an envoy to the Vatican, but he's finally done so. This past week, Joseph Donnelly presented his credentials as the American ambassador to Pope Francis. Donnelly is a double domer. That is, he got both his undergraduate and law degrees from the University of Notre Dame in South Bend, Indiana. He later represented Indiana in the House of Representatives, and from 2013 to 2019, the United States Senate. He was elected in 2012. He lost his re-election bid in 2018 to Republican Mike Braun. He and his wife Jill are now ensconced in the ambassador's residence, which is on the Janiculum Hill here in Rome, and he is in the saddle as the new American ambassador. There is a sense in which Donnelly gets here at a really propitious time. I mean, not only is there a much warmer relationship between Pope Francis and Biden than there was between Pope Francis and former President Donald Trump, but the war in Ukraine has kind of reminded the Vatican a little bit of why America is kind of good to have around. You know, the Vatican is really, since the era of John the 23rd, has tried to practice what is known as multilateralism in foreign policy, distancing itself to some extent from the Western powers, trying to be an independent pole in global affairs that is just as open to, say, Russia and China as it is to, say, the UK and the US. The current conflict, on the other hand, has clearly strained relations with Russia, and it has, I think, produced a kind of big chill, if you like, in relations between the Vatican and the Western powers. So many conflicts that the United States gets involved in one way or another are kind of muddled, and it's easy to be critical. In this case, on the other hand, I think the Pope and his team believe the United States and the other Western powers are on the side of the angels. So when Donnelly meets his Vatican counterparts, A, they're going to have a lot to talk about, and B, they are mostly going to be having those conversations as partners and allies rather than adversaries. We'll see what Donnelly does with the gig, but the stars seem to be aligned for him to be one of the more consequential American ambassadors to the Vatican that we've seen in quite some time. All right, next up on the rundown, a summit with plenty of subtext. We already knew that Pope Francis's travel schedule this summer is pretty crowded. We knew that he was planning to go to Lebanon in June. In early July, he'll be in the Democratic Republic of Congo and South Sudan. Later, he's planning to go to Canada. God knows what else. You know, for an 85-year-old pope with sciatica, a bum knee, and one lung, that's pretty ambitious. But now it turns out that itinerary may get even more complicated because there is talk that while Pope Francis is in Lebanon, immediately after, and those dates right now provisionally are the 12th and 13th of June, the idea now is that on the 14th, he would fly from Beirut to Amman, Jordan, and then from Amman, he would be choppered into Jerusalem, where he would have a meeting, an encounter with Patriarch Kirill of Moscow, who is the head of the Russian Orthodox Church. Now, if that actually happens, it is enormously significant for a couple of reasons. One is ecumenical. The split between Eastern and Western Christianity, conventionally dated to 1054, is the primordial schism in the Christian world. And for decades now, since Vatican II, the Catholic Church and various popes have been trying to heal that rift. In the Orthodox world, the Russians are the biggest, the wealthiest, and the most powerful player. And so, therefore, relations between Rome and Moscow inevitably have considerable ecumenical significance. But the other level of subtext here is obviously political. Patriarch Kirill is the leading Christian voice in defense of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Increasingly, Patriarch Kirill has been basically echoing the Kremlin's line on this conflict. Nothing particularly surprising about that. There has always been a very close relationship between throne and altar in Russia. Meanwhile, Pope Francis is probably the leading Christian critic of the Russian war in Ukraine, as we saw from his various reflections during the Easter season. And so, if the two leaders get together, well, look, let's just put it this way. Safe to say they would have a lot to talk about. And by the way, I would pay real money to be a fly on the wall in the room when the doors close and those guys get down to business. Frankly, I think if the Vatican were smart, they would make this a pay-per-view event. And you could sign up for like $25 or whatever and you could watch it. They could probably wipe out their entire annual deficit in one fell swoop. But, unlikely to happen. All right, outrage or outreach. On April 3rd, Sister Natalie Beckwart, who is a French sister and an undersecretary at the Synod of Bishops in the Vatican, gave an online PowerPoint presentation to a Catholic organization known as New Ways Ministry. Now, what is significant about that is that New Ways Ministry is dedicated to pastoral outreach to gay and lesbian Catholics, trying to make them feel welcome in the church. And they have been criticized over the years for allegedly sort of playing fast and loose with church teaching on human sexuality, especially homosexuality. During the 1990s, there was a high-profile investigation of New Ways Ministry, launched by then Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger, who later went on to become Pope Benedict, who was just, as we know, celebrated his 95th birthday. And although neither of the co-founders, that is Father Robert Nugent or Sister Janine Gramick, were formally disciplined, New Way's ministry, nevertheless, in certain circles, became synonymous with, well, for lack of a better word, dissent from official Catholic teaching on sexuality and marriage. And so in the wake, now, by the way, Sister Beckwart did not spend her time with New Way's ministry talking about lesbian and gay issues. Instead, this was a presentation about the upcoming Synod on Synodality. Frankly, I'm still a little fuzzy about exactly what that means. But she was trying to describe, I guess, the process behind this synod and how important it is to listen to people and to consult and so on. But nevertheless, the fact that she gave this talk has generated some controversy. Our friend and colleague Edward Penton of the National Catholic Register recently did an interview with Cardinal Raymond Burke, who is himself synonymous, I guess, with dissent on many points from the Francis papacy. And somewhat predictably, Cardinal Burke was disgruntled by Sister Beckwart's presentation. The money quote, I guess, was that it was simply wrong. Some Italian commentators of a more conservative bent have also been quite critical, but there is no indication from the Synod of Bishops that there is any sense of, well, what? That Sister Beckwart did anything wrong. I mean, after all, the premise of this whole synodal exercise is to try to listen to different voices in the Catholic conversation. They, no doubt, would argue that that's all she was doing, and it doesn't imply any particular doctrinal conclusions. We'll see how all that plays out. Finally, we end up this week in Germany, where a couple of German bishops during the past week have given interviews in which they have insisted that it is high time for the Vatican to make a decision about the fate of Cardinal Rainer Maria Woelki of the Archdiocese of Cologne. Now, aside from the fact that Cardinal Woelki is typically seen as one of the more conservative prelates in Germany amid a majority liberal, for lack of a better word, bishops' conference in that country, he has come under fire in recent years for his response to the clerical sexual abuse crisis. In 2015, Cardinal Woelki did not report a priest who was accused of abuse to the police. He cited later his reasons for doing so as the victim in the case did not want to testify. Now, the problem for Woelki is that the alleged victim later came forward and said, "What are you talking about? I would have been happy to testify. Nobody ever asked." And so that was certainly an embarrassment. That alone triggered some calls for Woelki to resign. Then he commissioned a first report on sexual abuse in the Archdiocese, but when it was done, he refused to release it to the public, citing problems in its methodology. A second report was commissioned, which, in the eyes of some, conveniently suggested that Woelki himself had not done anything wrong. It did, however, lead to the resignations of certain other officials. Recently, the third vicar general in a row in Cologne under Woelki had to resign, in this case for alleged financial improprieties. All of this led to a drumbeat of criticism and demands for Woelki to resign. Initially, he refused. Then, last year, when Cardinal Reinhard Marx of Munich offered to resign, saying somebody needs to take accountability for the pattern of sexual abuse in the German church, that was seen by many as an indirect criticism of Woelki refusing to take that step. Woelki did eventually submit his resignation to Pope Francis. The Vatican did a review, and the conclusion was that while Woelki was guilty of grave errors, that was the phrase used, grave errors, that none of them constituted crimes under civil law. So instead of accepting his resignation, Pope Francis gave him a 6-month sabbatical outside the Archdiocese. Now that time is up. Woelki is back, but it is unclear how long he's going to be around. I would note that he's only 65, so in theory, he doesn't have to submit his resignation for another 10 years. However, he has indicated that his fate is entirely in the hands of the Pope, and that has created an atmosphere of uncertainty around the Archdiocese, and nobody really knows if he's going to be in charge and for how long. That has led to some German bishops, including the president of the German Bishops' Conference, saying the Vatican needs to make a decision. Either they need to say he's out so the archdiocese can move on, or he's in and that's it, case closed, and that would at least provide some sense of what the deal is going to be. It would at least eliminate the uncertainty. Now, this is the Vatican, where they typically think in centuries, you know. I mean, the typical attitude in the Vatican is, ask me a question on Wednesday and I'll get back to you in 300 years. So, you know, we'll see how quickly the wheels grind. But in any event, the Germans are trying to turn up the heat to try to get some kind of resolution to the Woelki case. All right, that is our show for this week. Thank you for spending part of your Tuesday with us. Certainly hope you had a wonderful and blessed Easter weekend. Want to remind you that you can find full coverage of all the stories we've talked about this week on the Crux site. Again, that is cruxnow.com, cruxnow.com. Also want to remind you that we love bringing last week in the church to you. Proof is the fact that we're doing it on Pasquetta here in Italy when nobody else is working, but by God we are. But as much as we love it, I also have to acknowledge it's not free, you know? I mean, we have this lovely studio. We have terrific production help from our great friends at Longbeard. But, you know, we have to pay for rentals. We have to pay for equipment. We have to pay for time and people's expertise. And we could use your help, quite honestly. So when you go on the Crux site, you will find a nice and easy way to make a contribution to Crux. If you could, we would appreciate it from the bottom of our hearts. We especially appreciate those willing to sign up for a monthly contribution. It doesn't have to be very much. You know, maybe what you would spend this month, I don't know, streaming a couple of videos or something. But whatever it is, those monthly contributions give us stability. They give us the ability to make plans. They are critically important. Remember, our independence is our most precious asset, but it isn't cheap. It isn't free. We need your help to be able to continue to afford it. All right, over the next week, my charge to you is have a fantastic and blessed week. Stay safe, stay healthy, and we will talk to you again soon.